Good evening. Welcome to the 7th program in our 2022 Sawtooth Forum and Lecture Series, celebrating 50 years, which is what we're doing tonight. This series is brought to you by the Sawtooth Interpretive and Historical Association. My name is Cameron Dickey, and I'm the Historic Specialist here at the Stanley Museum. Before we begin, I would like to take a moment to acknowledge that here in the Sawtooth country, we are in the unceded and traditional lands of the Agadika and Dukudika bands of the Shoshone-Bannock tribes. We pay respect and honor to the tribes and the land they have continuously stewarded for generations. This program is free of charge thanks to our primary sponsors, Redfish Lake Lodge and the McNichol family, in memory of Roland McNichol, who was an avid series attendee and an advocate of the Sawtooths. We thank our sponsors for their continued support. As many of you know, the association is a member-based nonprofit. Now, would any current members of CHA please raise your hand? Thank you all for your support. Our mission is to protect and advance the natural and cultural history of Idaho's Sawtooth Salmon River country through preservation and education. Our operations are funded by donations, grants, memberships, and book and map sales at our bookstores located inside 9 ranger stations, as well as the Redfish Visitor Center and Gallery, and here at the Stanley Museum. We hope you will consider supporting us by making a donation tonight in our Sawtooth Bowl, use your credit card with our dip jar, or by becoming an annual member. If you have any questions about membership or anything else, find someone in one of those CHA blue shirts after the program and they will be happy to help. Tonight we are proud to bring you the Sawtooth National Recreation Area 50th Anniversary Forum.
All right, sorry, I forgot the script myself. So I'm Lynn, the executive director of the association. How's the sound for y'all? Good. You're good? Okay, perfect. So I'm going to do some introductions of our panel here, and then we have some questions that they have already heard, and then we'll open it up to you all. So we are going to start on the top of my list. Nope, we're going to start, oh, here we go. Jayne, to my left, your right, moved to Idaho in 1960 and worked as the Idaho National Lab, worked at the Idaho National Lab until 1990, programming nuclear reactor safety codes. He assisted the Greater Sawtooth Preservation Council, formed in 1969 to help stop the proposed molybdenum mine near Castle Peak. Which also led to the protection of the Sawtooth and White Cloud Mountains as the Sawtooth National Recreation Area in 1972. During the 70s and 80s, Jerry was a member of the Idaho Environmental Council and later president of the council. The group advocated for many conservation issues, including the designation of the River of No Return wilderness and protection of the Hells Canyon National Recreation Area. Welcome, Jerry. Next, to the right for all of you is Jim Hansen. He and his family have a long history with the Sawtooths. Jim is the son of Orville and June Hansen. His father served as a U.S. congressman and was one of the prime sponsors of the SNRA Act in 1972. Jim's a graduate of the College of William and Mary in Virginia and the University of Idaho College of Law. And he was the founding director of the Coalition United Vision of Idaho. He currently is serving his 3rd term as one of 5 elected commissioners for the Ada County Highway District. Next in the lineup here is Bert Bowler. He's a native Idahoan and graduated from the University of Idaho with an MS in Fisheries Management in 1972. He worked for the Idaho Department of Fish and Game for 29 years, and after retirement in 2001, he worked for Idaho Rivers United, and then formed the Snake River Salmon Solutions in 2007, where he works as an independent advocate to promote dialogue on the importance of restoring wild Snake River salmon and steelhead. He is the son of Bruce Bowler, who was a Boise attorney and active in the Greater Sawtooth Preservation Council and other groups of local hunters and anglers who advocated for the 1964 Wilderness Act, protested new dam proposals, and mobilized to gain support for the SNRA. And finally, we have Monica Church. the granddaughter of Frank and Bethine Church and Cecil and Carol Andrus. She is passionate and committed to the state of Idaho. She's the incoming new executive director of the Frank Church Institute, and spent the last decade teaching U.S. and comparative government and concurrent research courses at Boise High School. She sits on the boards of the Andrus Center and the Sawtooth Society, as well as the U.S. Global Leadership Coalition Idaho delegation. So welcome to our panelists. So what we're going to start with is a simple question. What is your connection to and relationship with the Sawtooth National Recreation Area? And anyone can take it. Yep, we'll need to pass them. All right, that might be off. Yeah.
Okay. My relationship to the Sawtooth National Recreation Area is that it is near and dear to my family on both sides. My father is the youngest son of Frank and Bethine, and my mother is the youngest daughter of Cecil and Carol Andrus. So I grew up out here. I have heard stories my entire life. I was not alive during the hard-fought battles to get the SNRA, but I was when Bethine created the Sawtooth Society. That was the first board that I joined when I graduated from grad school, and then I went on to join the Andrus Center, and now I'm the executive director of the Frank Church Institute. The SNRA is something that I'm very passionate about preserving. I know that this land is special for all of us Idahoans. It's also special for what we have dubbed the transplants here in the valley, and they need to be educated. Recreationalists need to be continually educated, and we need to save and preserve everything that makes being an Idahoan and being a part of this magical valley so special. So it's a familiar relationship, but it's also something that I will not stop ever trying to protect and preserve.
Well, I grew up as the son of Bruce Bowler, and so our early life was all about getting out in the wilds of Idaho, of which we spent a lot of time in this area. My dad was in total awe of Idaho salmon and steelhead. Their migratory behavior, going all the way from the upper Salmon River to the North Pacific and back, was just an inspiring piece of his life for his career as a pro bono attorney. The Salmon River is the furthest and the highest spawning area from the upper reaches of the Salmon River anywhere on the planet for primarily spring, summer chinook and steelhead. My association with the NRA, or pre-NRA, was initially taking horseback trips in Toxaway and Hollis Lakes with the Clark Miller Guest Ranch in the 50s. From then on, we did a lot of backpacking. The lakes that I have visited: Martin, Kelly, Barron, Frog, Boulder Chain, Walker Island, a backpack into the Goat Creek drainage that's a tributary to the South Fork of the Payette, and spent time at Decker Flats back in the era when there were in excess of 50,000 spring summer chinook coming into the Snake. Now there are less than 10,000. So it's the whole idea of the high altitude land to support these fish is here. This is the highest elevation pretty much in the state to support at least anadromous fish. So it's just been part of my life growing up to be part of all the stuff that has taken place, especially living with Bruce, who was an attorney that was involved in all these issues, as Lynn said. And so I was there when they were suing all these different agencies and trying to protect dams from being put in the Snake River, etc. So it's been kind of my passion as well to continue in that vein.
Thanks, Bruce. Bert. You can call me Orville. So, the Hansens have lived in eastern Idaho for 1,000,000 years. We also grew up with the Clarks in eastern Idaho. My grandfather owned a share in the Falconberry Ranch back in the 1930s, and he took his kids back there and brought his kids up here to go camping and fishing. They didn't do a lot of hunting, but going into the forest was part of who you were growing up in eastern Idaho. And in fact, that's exactly what my dad did then, raising us. Brought us into the backcountry, he got involved in public service from before I was born. So in fact, he ran for public office same year that Frank Church did. Dad ran for the Idaho legislature, and his heart was in policy. He just loved policy. And it was a good combination of people who loved the outdoors and understand what was at stake, and the policy wonks of how statutes are written and so forth. And within 2 terms, he was the majority leader in the legislature. And then after a couple of years, ran for the U.S. Congress. He wasn't successful in 1962, but was in 1968, and he was blessed to be there at a time when Len Jordan, another person he was close to, Frank Church and Jim McClure, were all in there and was there at the time. And I think one of the things I want to touch on this evening is what were some of the factors that resulted in it, because I think those stories need to be told. That it wasn't like a miracle. It was just a lot of people at the right time. It was built on relationships that were built over many, many years, and opportunities to build on those relationships and the connections they had with what is here in the heart of Idaho. That was kind of like my world growing up, which I thought every kid grew up in a world like that. But he also wasn't the best politician, at least in terms of his own political party, and so they chose to boot him out after 6 years. He wasn't doctrinaire enough, I guess, but he continued to work at it in public policy and building a center for public policy. And then when I finished school and moved to Boise and started working in the law over there and fell in love with someone from Idaho Falls, where else would you get married but up at the Rocky Mountain Ranch with the Sawtooths as your backdrop? And that then reminded Dad, oh yeah, that's right, I'd been meaning to buy property up here. So that very year is when he figured out, and that's a long story over a couple of drinks to tell you how Dad managed to get a piece of property up here, and we have spent a lot of time reconnecting. So it's sort of like weaving this into the lives of all. Dad and Mom, by the way, had 7 kids, and then all of us, and then our kids, and the next generation very much feel this is woven into their hearts. Even though some of them live in Illinois and Virginia and McCall and other places, this is very, very much a part of their hearts, and so that's our connection to this area.
Thank you, Lynn, and other members of the Sawtooth Association. Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. Is this coming through? I don't know.
That's good. Good.
Okay, well, good evening anyway. It's great to be alive. And it's great to be alive here in this place this evening, in this beautiful place on the planet. And with that, let me tell you how I got involved. In 1968, there was something in our Post Register about some hikers going into a place called White Clouds and finding people doing a lot of digging around up near Hassel Peak, and they were a little upset. And I think Rob Brady, editor of the PR, who loved that place, must have put something in and got people stirred up. And things started happening, and under some public pressure, the Forest Service finally decided to have some hearings. They had some hearings in 1969, and to everybody's amazement, several hundred people turned out at Idaho Falls and Boise and Chalice. And turns out Governor Samuelson was all in favor of the mine, and so he was on the other side. And Ernie Day, a good buddy of Bruce Bowler, who are passionate about a lot of things environmental, was so upset that he publicly resigned his position on the State Parks Board, and that got good news press too. And we had editors working for us, Rob Brady, the PR, and then over at the Idaho Statesman, Dick Hronick and Ken Robison were writing great editorials, so we had that going for us. The Greater Sawtooth Preservation Council was formed. In eastern Idaho, it was John Merriam and Russ Brown. John Merriam was a president, Russ Brown was a vice president, and Dick Meyer from Ketchum was a vice president. And then we had other people on there. Boyd Norton was on it, who got out of appearing here tonight on this panel by being having medical problems. And Cyril Slansky and a guy called Art McClure. Anyway, and then over in Boise, there was a chapter of Bruce Bowler, Ernie Day, Tom Davis, Ted Trueblood, and so forth, some other people. And they were coming up with a plan, in addition to fighting the brush fires and keeping the publicity alive and keeping people informed, they came up with a plan for permanent protection. It would be a combination national park / Sawtooth national recreation area, with the higher the peaks, of course, being in the park, and the lower areas being in the preserve, or the NRA, where hunting and grazing would still be allowed. And I was just starting to pay attention, and Buddy and I hiked in and climbed Castle Peak about that time. And yeah, when I was young, I was strong as an ox and half as smart. And now I'm just half as smart. So I got roped into this program tonight. Anyway, what happened next? Oh yes, the House Subcommittee on Parks and Recreation held a hearing on bills which Senator Church and he and Senator Jordan had introduced. One was the Sawtooth bill, which the Greater Sawtooth Preservation Council had advocated. Church had introduced that. And then he and Jordan, Senator Jordan, had introduced a bill for a national recreation area. And they had it in Sun Valley in 1970, yeah. And 500 people showed up. This is something new in Idaho. I mean, things were starting to happen. There was a lot of stuff going on environmentally, I can tell you that. I was president of the Idaho Environmental Council. I had my hands full, and also secretary of the Hells Canyon Preservation Council. So I didn't really, I have to say, I didn't really get very involved with the Sawtooth. I was just kind of on the fringes, taking cues from these guys, Russ Brown in particular, whom I talked with practically every day, a good friend and mentor, very sharp individual, one of the real brains behind the GSPC. Of course, there's Bruce Bowler and Ernie Day and so forth. And they had the hearing, 500 people. They had to split it up into 2 different buildings with 2 different congressmen conducting. I think they got down to the point where they were only allowing a minute each for people to speak, and it was a real circus. But anyway, by my count, people who supported the GSPC plan were in the majority. I don't think everybody agreed with that, but I usually count when I go to a hearing. I'm a numbers guy, kind of a numbers geek. Anyway, so that was about where it happened. And then, of course, Cecil Andrus got elected in 1970 as governor of Idaho, largely or partly on the White Clouds issue. And the Environmental Council has to take some credit because one of our directors, Pete Hinault, organized a fundraiser banquet for him even. But anyway, he got elected, and it turns out in 1970 became the top Idaho news story. I think I better quit there.
So Jerry clearly has, there's a perfect segue into this next question here. That sets up sort of some of that background of what was going on at the time and the people involved. The Greater Sawtooth Preservation Council was advocating for a national park, and that was sort of the first efforts to protect this place was always the idea of a national park. So many people were still focused on the idea of that designation when the National Recreation Area was being debated about and compromise was being made at the Washington level. So the next question here is, how do you feel about the compromise of the National Recreation Area, and do you think it has worked?
Big question, especially because I wasn't there, and so I'm not an expert on this. I'll let them. I will say, however, I made a comment at the Sawtooth soiree just a couple of weeks ago about how I've been recently spending a lot of time in the church papers at Boise State University where I work. And the church papers, if you've never been into the archives, are just fascinating. Bethine and Frank kept everything. And I think a lot of you probably kept things from Bethine and Frank, and many of those have made it into that archive. In the archive, I found that there was a lot going on behind the scenes during this time. And so when we talk about whether or not the compromise worked, I mean, it was what had to happen. It was hard fought, and it was uniquely Idaho. I grew up with both sets of grandparents talking a lot about these kind of compromises, about snowmobilers associations, about roadless areas, about who can fly, where, when. I mean, these are conversations that have been going on a long time, and they are uniquely Idaho. And the compromise that was made here is so special, and the reason that it continues to be this area is because we allowed and maintained that relationship with ranchers and anglers and hunters and snowmobilers and skiers and ATVers and everybody in between. And national park, you know, I mean, I grew up, I mean, long before I went to a national park, I had been lost in the Frank. You know, I'd been horsepacking with my grandpa Cease in the White Clouds, you know, down the river of no return. I just thought, somebody said here that was what everybody had growing up. So I remember the first time I went to a national park, and I was just, I didn't understand why I had to stay on the path. And I still have that feeling every time I go into a national park. You know, I taught high school for a very long time, so the word FOMO, right, fear of missing out. I always have that when I go to a national park. Like, what if I could just get right over there, or right over there? If I could just get off this path and over there, there's probably a hot springs, there's probably something. So I am glad that they worked as hard as they did for the compromise they did. I'm very proud of the work that all of you did and that my grandparents did to make this uniquely Idaho area. And I know we'll talk about things that we might do differently, you know, if we had time machines, and I'll save my comments about that. But the compromise is working. Today on our tour, we heard a lot from the Forest Service about the easements, about how often private landowners do, in fact, you know, adhere to the easements. You know, there are a few, but that's just the way that life goes. We always hear about the few and not the many. And so it works, it's working, as long as we all continue to do this. And I know that's the third question, so I'll save that for that too. Okay.
I don't think it could be better said than what Monica said. But one thing after reviewing this stuff, especially if you haven't read Ken Robeson's book on Idaho's heritage, it's really worth reading because legislative sausage is a tough job, and it's amazing what they had to put up with and how they work together to get things done. But it's really a phenomenal, because we're sort of, in terms of my view, I think what they worked out with the SNRA is much better than what would have happened with a national park. But and if you look at all the other environmental issues that all these people have been involved in, Cecil Andrus and Frank Church and actually Len Jordan and the rest of them, it's just a lot of compromise and a lot of work. And if we're looking at moving and shaking environmental issues now, congressionally, it's just, I'm not sure we have the experience that a lot of these people had in the past to move forward with other issues we've got going now.
What was the name of that book, sir?
Ken Robeson's book, Defending Idaho's Natural Heritage.
We have it for sale.
It's for sale here. There's a discount for members. I was blessed to be, when I served in the Idaho legislature, to have served my whole 6 years with Ken Robeson. Boy, what an amazing guy. So to a great extent, I think the question is a little off, and what I really appreciate about Frank Church and Len Jordan and Orville Hansen and Jim McClure and all of their staffs and the people who were involved for many years is that they weren't hung up on the, okay, we need this title, this kind of protection, because we kind of, okay, we got Yellowstone and we got Glacier. What they understood was that they understood the people who lived here. There were a lot of ranching families, there were a lot of homesteaders who lived in this valley. There are a lot of people like my grandparents and many, many others who would come up and spend a lot of time up here. So the question wasn't as, what kind of designation do you want, but what do you want to save? What is it? What are the core values that you need to save? And that's where those terms came from, pastoral, you know, and frankly, most of them didn't say, I want to mine this area. We got lots of places we're going to mine, and by the way, you know, there's probably not a lot up here. We heard some stories today on a bus tour about, you know, they attempted to mine silver and it didn't really play out very well. So there wasn't this sort of desire that this should be mined, and then when the events occurred with the Sarcos, it was like, whoa, well, maybe there's something in there and somebody from outside's going to rip the heck out of this place. So let's get busy. And so they weren't hung up on that, on the labels, which was really good. And I think those relationships that each of those four members of the delegation, and really it's not just those four, they'll be the first to tell you it was a lot of other people. Dad worked in the U.S. Congress as a staffer for Senator Dworshak, and a lot of those same staffers went to work for Senator Jordan, because Senator Dworshak suddenly died and Senator Jordan was appointed, and then he was elected in a special election with Senator Church, 1962. A lot of great history there, but those relationships were really, really important. And when Dad was elected to Congress, he brought along somebody he worked with on Senator Dworshak's staff, and she had deep, deep roots in North Idaho, Louise Shattuck. And so it was really critical to make this a statewide opportunity. The other is that each of them had enough understanding of the politics and of the politics of their own parties and of things going on. You remember, and all through the 1950s, there was this sort of craziness over communists, and then the John Birch Society, and then there was all this this current that affected whether some of those guys, and they were all guys at this point, stayed or not in the political landscape and could play. And so they also realized, hey, we're looking around, we don't have these ideologues, people who are sort of that ilk. I use this term because this is Louise Shattuck taught me. We would sit around talking about, you know, the people who get in the way, and she just called them lightweights, which was her euphemism. And there were some lightweights who represented us in Congress, and they weren't going to be. They were the first ones who, as soon as somebody said, "Oh, you know, the federal government will come in and do this, that, and the other," they were the first ones to go. Well, all four of the members of the delegation during those 2 years understood that and could figure that out. The other was, and talking to Dad, was constantly giving credit to everybody else, but he also understood that you needed to provide some political cover for other people, and so that was part of the way in which this compromise, and compromise is kind of the useful term, but I think what happened was that there was a lot of those values that the ranchers, the family, the working families, the car dealers down in Pocatello, the business people, the bankers in Boise, they all sort of understood those, and so they could reflect. Once they saw that, they said, okay, this has some of those values that are written into it, you know, whatever you call it, you know, a park, a national, as long as it's protected, and that's what's going to be protected. So I think we get tripped up on the notion of there's this thing called a national park, and it has to be some sort of gold standard thing. I think they did an extraordinary job incorporating those values into federal law, and that federal law has become a model, and it's still there. But I want to point out, it was somewhat of a fragile process to put it together. Just because it's 50 years old doesn't mean it's any less fragile. It still has to operate in the same political and economic environment. And so it's our job to keep protecting that. And so I think maybe we can kind of move on from whether it should or shouldn't be a national park and think about how we protect what this fragile compromise was.
Yeah, I as to the question, is it working? I think it is. I don't know a heck of a lot about what's going on over here. I've been over here for several years, and I have been following. So I will have to admit that I think it is a good fit for the area. We in the GSPC, and well, I wasn't on the board in GSPC. As I said, I was kind of tangentially. What I was doing was I edited the Environmental Council newsletter, and I was putting a lot of articles in that. They'd feed me, or I'd get from the newspaper or something, keeping people alerted, you know. So I was helping out a little bit, but we did want a national park, NRA combination, and so when in 1971 the delegation introduced the NRA bill, and no park bill, we were disappointed, a little bit ticked off, frankly, because there had been strong support at the Sun Valley hearing, and we had a new governor who was strongly pro-park, and Governor Andrus was greatly in favor of a national park. But the GSPC did an analysis of the bill that passed and found it wanting in several areas, mainly regarding mining, because the way it was written, it looked like it would allow Asarco and other people to mine in the White Clouds. So maybe I should save the talk on the amendments for the next question. Yeah, I think you're going to ask us what we do if we change things. Well, I'd like to tell you what was done by the people in power. That's it.
All right, great, thank you. So our next question, as Jerry alluded to, is you know, one of the things that Public Law 92-400 was addressing was sort of concerns of the times, right? And I'm sure not everyone can see this, but this is some of the very first lines of that law, assurance to preserve for the preservation and protection of natural, scenic, historic, pastoral, and fish and wildlife values, and to provide for the enhancement of recreation values associated therewith. And then behind me here we have some more details in section 2. So in reflecting on those and other details, which I'm sure you've spent much time on in preparation for this, if you were able to go back and sort of look at that legislation, while it was addressing concerns of the time, is there something you would change that you think could have made it more effective?
Well, I did do a little research for this one because it had been a long time since I had read the original bill, so I would be amiss if I didn't start by saying I would probably start by changing the language to remove the pronoun he for the Secretary of Agriculture 17 times. But after that, I think it's a great piece of legislation. Oftentimes, great policy, the problem is not in the writing, it's in the enforcement. And so I don't know that I would change the wording of the piece of legislation. I mean, I'll talk a little bit about things, you know, now we know that I might change. I am going to read, though, from section 6. I don't have it memorized, but you did section 1 and 2. But this is what I think is so uniquely important about what makes the Sawtooth National Recreation Area so great and what we need to remember as we move forward. So section 6 says, the Secretary may cooperate with other federal agencies, with the state and local public agencies, with private individuals and agencies in the development and operation of facilities and services in the area, and furthermore, for the purposes of this act, including but not limited to the restoration and maintenance of the historic setting and background of the frontier ranch-type town of Stanley. I mean, that says it all. What do we need to do? What did we need to do? You know, what do we need to do moving forward is we need to recognize that public-private partnerships are awesome. They really, really, truly work. I kind of think of it as, you know, the public factor is like a grandpa or a professor who has this long vision and knows, you know, kind of these roadblocks and can help guide you. And the private is like that hyperactive child that just wants. And when you get them together, you not only get mountain bike trails in a time when, you know, when this was written, we wouldn't have even thought about it, but you get them maintained and built in a way that is proper and aligns with the original mission and vision of the piece of legislation. What was the rest of the question?
Anything more effective?
Oh, right. Okay, yeah. So it's great. It's wonderful. But you can't go backwards. You know, we learn only because we know, right? As a parent, it really makes sense when somebody says you don't know until you know. And so if we could go back, we have a huge problem with how we get people into this area. Housing our support staff, our service individuals, Forest Service, and service generally is a major problem in Stanley, and it's something I'm not sure exactly how you could put into a piece of legislation, but it is something that we need to work at moving into the future. A recreation area is only as good as the people who are there to help us recreate. And if we are not providing housing and support for those people to work where they live, then we have failed, you know, to make a recreation area for all. And so if I had a magic wand, I would certainly add something that allowed us the opportunity to provide permanent housing for the Forest Service, for Fish and Game, for young people to come and to learn and to recreate and to get into the backcountry. So that we weren't fighting this ever-pressing need to have volunteers but nowhere to house them. And then I would also include much stronger language about our indigenous communities and how we can support them in upholding federal law that promises that we will allow indigenous communities to hunt, fish, and be on the land that was originally theirs. So those were my two.
As for the last question, I don't think I can add any more to that.
I would echo Monica. I'm going to get wonky on you, sorry. One of the things I don't know that the authors appreciated, but it was a true blessing, was the commitment and the financial commitment to purchase the easements when they did. And they could not have probably imagined the difference between the wealth gap that existed then and exists today is just exponentially. It's phenomenally huge. And to be able to do that in today's environment is incredibly challenging. There's wonderful stories of people who sold the easement on their property. They gave those rights because it was like, this makes sense, because, you know, I've eked out a living, my family's enjoyed it, and this will, you know, this is a critical piece of investment in my family. So they saw it very differently. You know, they understood, they'd been through the Depression, they understood what a few $100,000 worth of investment in exchange for the scenic easement. You couldn't do that today, offer a few $100,000 for some of the properties up here now. So it's a very, very different environment. The other wonky thing is that having worked in local government and in a state that doesn't give local government a lot of tools, but there are some tools, and some of those tools are this notion of, so you're going to increase value with this investment. How do you capture that value so that it comes back and you can maintain it? And that's the sort of the concept behind an urban renewal district. You know, we're going to basically take the added tax value and apply that back into the urban renewal area so that we can maintain and continue to invest and hopefully spur additional investment. And we were down this morning talking with the Blaine County Recreation District. You know, there's another tool where you can create an entity where as values continue to go up, because you just have to look around. This is incredibly valuable. How do you capture that monetarily so that you can then reinvest that in trail maintenance and in employee housing and in all kinds of things that is so critical, instead of having to feel like you have to go back for a federal appropriation. So somehow figuring out, and I hope it's not too late, to come out some sort of creative way of using those kinds of tools, LID, local tools, local option tools, in a way of capturing that value so that it can be reinvested into the area. That's the only thing I could think of that I'd do different.
Well, I looked at the law. I don't have any suggestions about changing it. I do want to mention changes that were made in the final analysis when we were getting down to the wire. As I said, the GSPC was disappointed because there was no Parkville, so they had to continue to support the idea, but they also wanted some strengthening amendments put in regarding mining, because it looked like mining could proceed the way it was written. So the House had passed the bill 309-9, and one of the people who spoke out amongst the 9 was John Saylor, Representative John Saylor from Pennsylvania, who was a strong wilderness proponent. He said it's a sham, you know, and it's going to allow mining, and he entered the GSPC analysis into the congressional record, which is something congressmen do sometimes. Anyway, Russ Brown and Tom Davis and Pat Bartholomew got a chance to talk with Senator Church when they were back at the earlier House hearing, and they had obviously sent him the copy of the analysis, and he came around and agreed to try to get these strengthening amendments in, and he did, and he got the rest of the delegation to come along with it. And they were to make new mineral entry withdrawal permanent. It was only in there for 5 years in the existing bill, so they got that in for permanent, no new mining. There were special use provisions, language in there, which would have allowed miners to keep doing what they were doing and have roads and so forth. He got that language removed. And Russ even told me there was provision in there earlier for a mill site. If you can have a mill up by your mine, you know, it's going to be a lot more economic. If you don't have a mill there, you're not, you know, because the molybdenum, I forgot to look that up. I don't know, anybody know what percentage it is? It's a very low percentage of the material you have to dig out. So you got that in there, and then they also added the provision the Forest Service would be authorized to buy or accept or even condemn in serious cases mineral interests. And there's also a provision in there for a study by the Park Service to study the area for a national park within 3 years. So Senator Church got the delegation to go along with that. They got those strengthening amendments in, and by doing that they transformed the bill from something that was pretty weak and what the miners supported actually to a bill that is protecting it. Now there are a lot of questions yet about, are we really safe from mining? We don't know for sure, because there are claims still up there, and I wasn't able to put my finger on this. This information's kind of hard to get, I think. But Ken Robinson says that as of 1975, you know, this is 3 years after this passed, his book was written in 2014, by the way. He said that there were 7,000 claims that the Forest Service had to investigate. Most of them were, you know, frivolous or whatever you call it. There were some that were contested, and then there were 75 yet that were still up there. 75 claims that were considered to be valid. They weren't patented. Okay, patented claim is when you essentially get the government to agree and you buy it for $5 an acre and the land is yours. But then, I don't think any of them are patented. So they're unpatented claims, but I'd be interested in knowing what happened since 1975 to those, and if we really are fairly sure there won't be mining in the White Clouds, because that's how it all started, you know, the fracas over, I won't say it's over protection, because there were proposals for a Sawtooth Park back in 1911 by the Federation of Idaho Federation Women's Club, and they were pursued, and there were bills, and Senator Church had a bill in '66, and he got shot down. The Forest Service adamantly opposed these, and the Idaho wool growers and a lot of other groups. But the Forest Service, I don't hate the Forest Service, but they are not going to give up land to management to the Park Service without a very serious fight. So anyway, I think I have to say that I think that we're doing a pretty good job here, and eat a little crow maybe. Before we leave, I want to read a quote from Kevin's book. I don't know if I'm going to do it or not.
We've got one more question.
Yeah, let's go.
Do you think it's okay? All right, so we've got one more question, and then Jerry's got a quote, and then we'll open it up to you all. So considering that times are different 50 years later, if you were advising people today about how to preserve and protect public lands in Idaho, or more specifically the Sawtooth NRA better, what would your advice be today?
Well, I don't know. I was just trying to think about this. So I taught comparative government for a long time, and in my class we always discussed why states fail or what to do with a fragile state. And so I would make them just repeat over and over again, right? The key to maintaining strong states are institutions and civil society. And they would just repeat this over and over again. And, you know, I think it's good. So civil society is essential for American democracy, and it's essential for any organization or any preservation of land or schools, or it just doesn't matter what it is. So what would I do? I would ask everyone to join a civil society group to work toward this impressive public-private partnership, to give every penny that you have available to organizations like CHA or the Sawtooth Society or the Andrus Center and the Frank Church Institute or Idaho Trails, you know, or Idaho Conservation League. I mean, these groups are working so hard every day to maintain this land, and they can't do it alone, right? It takes money, and it takes staff, and it takes time, and it takes resources, and we know that the Forest Service budgets keep going down, and so civil society groups, these organizations are going to become more and more important if we want to give this land to our children and grandchildren. And then the second thing, which is probably the most near and dear to my heart, is we have to start listening to the youth. I find myself to be the youngest person in most rooms I'm in, and I'm not that young. And there's a problem with that. Kurt, who is the representative from the Shoshone-Bannock tribes earlier, talked about how kids always ask him during these educational sessions, well, what can I do to, you know, help the salmon? What can I do to, you know, help preserve this land? And you know, and I think we all tell kids this and that and the other. My advice to you is to actually follow through with that. Tell them what they can do and then help them, mentor them, be a guide for them, take them under your wing, support Idaho State, University of Idaho and Boise State in advancing more opportunities for young people to come into the wilderness, promote the Forest Service or other jobs like that where young people can see a career path in these fields. Because again, when I look around and I'm in these conversations and in these rooms, I don't see a lot of young faces. And so we've got to start promoting this work, and we have to start listening to the youth. And that means that we have to be where they are. I know it is hard, but we have to be where they are. We have to be online. We have to be on TikTok. We have to understand QR codes. We have to be where they are, and we have to help them. And you know, so that's my advice, is to listen to the kids and to actually follow up when you tell them, oh, you can do this and this and this, and follow the youth salmon protectors. They're doing really, really great work.
Monica, I think those were really good points, but something that's really missing right now in the SNRA for the health of the SNRA are the anadromous fish. And they're in so few numbers as what appeared a century ago, that we have to do, and we have to engage the public in that issue, that we've got to get more anadromous fish back to this site, this area, to enhance the health of it, because it's not healthy. The nutrients that those salmon brought out of the North Pacific Ocean, and when they spawned and died, just drove the ecosystem, and we're missing that. And so we need to get engaged in the issues. And that was sort of the point I was making before. This whole problem we have now in terms of sausage making in Congress, I don't think we don't have the people that we had before when the SNRA was put together that have the capability and the ability to see for the public-private partnerships to make the issue happened in Congress is so overwhelming the way I see it now but to make this healthy again, we've got to engage in that issue because it's a huge challenge and so much needs to get done in the short term.
So I remember as a kid, Dad would always organize these mountain trips. The Forest Service would put together these trips, backpack, horseback trips into the wilderness, into the forests that he represented. We represented the 2nd Congressional District. And he'd bring me along and several other of the younger generation. We were kids then. But the most vivid memory I had after a long hike into the wilderness is the conversations that happened around that campfire. Because it really made the connection of where we were and the challenges of protecting that and the worlds that each person lived in, whether it was in the Forest Service or in the U.S. Congress or with a business that they were running out of, Horseshoe Bend, or this vivid memory of that transformational impact, and I don't think we can underestimate the value of constantly reaching out and bringing people. It's perhaps it's even more challenging now, but that means we have to just push ourselves that much further. Who might have an idea about how evil government is, people have been bashing the federal government for years, and that's Steve Sims was elected with this. Remember his apple, take a bite out of government, and George Hansen was elected with chopping down big government, and so those currents have been going on, and the way that we've been able to continue to work and overcome that is bringing people in and say, well, actually, here's an example of where when it works right, it can work right, and we need to tell those stories. It's not just a policy, it's deep, and so we need to push ourselves to keep bringing people in. And as soon as Dad basically sort of retired, he never really retired, he would bring people here, from people he'd meet, old friends who'd never been to Idaho, and they would come here and they would sit. It was harder to get in the backcountry and sit around a campfire, but they'd sit on the Salmon River and have those same conversations. And that's so critical. We got to push ourselves. There's a whole bunch of people. There's people living in Custer County who have notions about how evil the government is. But we need to have conversations, and those conversations are about why this place is so important to us, and keep reaching out and model that to our kids. We have those conversations, multi-generational conversations, and know that it's going to take. That's really powerful. It can't be done in the abstract. It can't all be done in Washington D.C. or in Boise. It's got to be a lot of people, and I can't tell you how many people who came to my mom passed away this year, and we recorded her funeral and passed it around through YouTube, and because friends and family from around the world, she was originally from England, watched that, and they would email or write us letters, and almost every one of them reminded us of their visit to this place called Stanley and their time with Orville and June on the Salmon River. And that may have been their only time, but that is what they vividly remember. And I'm sure, I have no doubt, that part of the story of the Sawtooth National Recreation Area was part of that conversation. So we can do that. We all have to do that. And those stories then get passed on to the next generation. This is how our brothers and sisters in the Native American community did it, and they preserved this land for thousands of years, so we can do that too.
Oh, yeah. I think I'll read the quote first. This is a great book, and as they said, it's for sale here. I'm not in the society. I'm not I'm not an interested party here. It is a great book, and Ken was a great guy. This is sort of a little summary. He has several chapters in here about the battle over the White Clouds and the Sawtooth and so forth. But he says this, and I better get my glasses.
I'll hold the mic.
You hold the mic. Oh, no, you don't have to. Oh, that's okay. All members of the congressional delegation contributed to the creation of the National Recreation Area, but Church was the primary author and advocate, beginning with his Sawtooth Wilderness Park Bill of 1960. His cordial relationship with Senator Jordan helped win Jordan's support for the White Clouds addition and the mining amendments. Orville Hansen was an early convert to White Clouds protection. Governor Andrus played a key role with his 1970 election victory and continuing advocacy for a park. But there would have been no legislation to protect the White Clouds without Ernie Day and the campaign waged by the Greater Sawtooth Preservation Council. Day's Castle Peak photo, his clash with Samuelson, and his dogged insistence that there could be no mine fueled a successful citizens' movement. The GSPC leaders refused to settle for a weak national recreation area bill and persuaded Church to sponsor the strengthening amendments. Credit should also go to Jayne Conley Smith and the Idaho Federation of Women's Clubs for their Sawtooth Park campaign begun in 1911. Idahoans had been seeking recognition and protection of the Sawtooth country for 61 years. We're supposed to offer some words of encouragement on what people can do. My bag is wilderness, pretty much. My interest in conservation, wilderness, protecting wilderness, wild rivers, wildlife habitat, and as we later started using the terminology, biodiversity. So I'm pretty much a gung-ho wilderness advocate. I can't examine the resources closely as I used to. My legs won't let me do that. But we had the roadless area and review evaluation the Forest Service did from National Forest wild areas. The first one was a real first cut, very coarse inventory in finished in 1972, and then about 77, 78 they did a closer one compelled by lawsuits from conservationists, and we realized there are still, I think, something like 8 million acres of National Forest roadless area that are inventoried as National Forest roadless areas out of the total 40 million acres of National Forest. Whoa. Yeah, in Idaho. No, that's not right. The old memory banks. There were 8 or 9 million, there were 9, there were 8 million acres. And some of these areas have exceptional wilderness qualities. They should be protected as wilderness, we feel. We conservationists had proposals off and on over the years. For some of these, there's an area, the Palisades, over in my neck of the woods. It's half in Wyoming, half in Idaho, and it's a 250,000 acres of beautiful, rugged, highly biodiverse area. 250,000. That's the same size as the Sawtooth Wilderness. Still unroaded. Imagine that. And then there are other areas in the state. You want to get involved. If you know some of these areas, you've been in some of these areas, speak up for them. But it's something. It's a project waiting. They are projects. There's one up on the Great Burn Wilderness. It's a 250,000 acres. You're witnessing the advanced stages of geezerhood. So anyway, that's just that's just one suggestion. There as has been alluded to, without citizen involvement, there can be no progress. Thank you very much.
Sorry, one more thing that I did want to say, and I didn't get to it. Certainly private aspects, right? Joining these organizations, joining the boards, giving financially, getting kids out, yes. But the public aspect, nearly every day when somebody finds out who my grandparents were, they say the same thing. Oh, gosh, if only Cecil were around and, you know, he could be governor again, or if only Frank were around. Which means that all those people know what it means or what it looks like to be that kind of politician. And it doesn't, if these people are not all Democrats, right? They're Republicans, they're Democrats, they're independents, they're somewhere in between. So they know that it's possible. They know that kind of politician. And so I would say, what can we do? Run for office, right? Or encourage somebody to run for office and to help them get there. People say, you know, if not you, who? Well, here in Idaho, we know who. So it should be you, right? Or somebody very close to you. So yes, join in the private fight on the outside, but please also join in the public fight and run for office, locally, state, federally, get involved.
Well, thank you.